The broken Bentley. The summer sun of Arizona glared down upon the city of Phoenix, turning the world into a blazing reflection of shimmering glass and golden dust that rippled off every surface. And inside the white Bentley Continental that sliced through the heat haze, Maria Delgado sat in an aura of control and precision, the kind of woman who had built walls so high around herself that nothing except success could reach her anymore. She was 42, elegant, commanding, and every inch of her existence was measured in figures and achievements, from the weight of her diamond earrings to the net worth on her balance sheet, her eyes fixed on the tablet in her hand as her driver maneuvered through morning traffic, while she signed digital contracts that sealed deals worth millions without even lifting her head, the latest being the Henderson property, a $15 million sale that would add another thick layer to her empire of luxury real estate. She was the kind of person who did not believe in luck, only in dominance, and every interaction in her life reflected that belief. Maria's sharp voice broke the silence as she ordered her driver to take the highway, her tone cutting through the hum of the air conditioning like a blade. "I don't have time for this traffic," she snapped. And Carlos, her driver of 3 years, responded in a quiet tone that barely carried emotion. "Yes, Mrs. Delgado," and though she barely looked at him, her mind registered that he was as unimportant to her as the engine that purred beneath the Bentley's hood, just another tool in a perfectly ordered life, useful yet replaceable, and like every person of service she encountered, Maria viewed him as invisible until he made a mistake. That was how she had learned to survive in a world that she believed was divided into only two kinds of people, those who gave orders and those who took them. The sudden grinding sound from the engine shattered her rhythm like an insult. The smooth purr of the Bentley turned into a harsh growl that made the luxury car tremble, and Maria's eyes lifted from her tablet, confusion turning to irritation as the car began to lose speed. "What is happening?" she demanded, and Carlos quickly guided the car toward the shoulder, glancing nervously at the dashboard. "The engine light just came on, ma'am," he said. But before he could pull fully over, the Bentley coughed like a dying animal and stopped altogether. Maria's face twisted with frustration as she stepped out, the blast of desert heat hitting her like a wall, her expensive heels clicking against the cracked pavement of a street she would never have willingly entered otherwise. She looked around and saw the kind of neighborhood that didn't exist in her world: peeling paint on houses, old cars baking in the sun, and people moving slowly through the thick heat of another ordinary struggle. The name on a faded sign caught her attention: Santos Auto Repair, a small oil-stained shop with its doors open to the street, and though the sight of it made her grimace, Maria had no other choice. Her dealership couldn't send a tow truck for 3 hours because of an accident on the freeway, and she had an appointment that would not wait. So she crossed the street carefully, avoiding puddles of muddy water, her disgust barely contained, stepping into the dim interior of the small garage where the air smelled of oil, steel, and something she couldn't quite define. Maybe humility. Maybe simplicity, maybe both. "Hello," she called impatiently, her tone commanding rather than polite. And after a moment, a man rolled out from under a pickup truck, rising to his feet and wiping his hands on a rag. He was in his early 30s, his dark hair streaked with sweat, his eyes intelligent and calm, and though he wore a blue uniform stained with grease, there was something about the way he stood: quiet confidence, the kind that didn't beg for respect but carried it naturally. "Good morning," he said, his accent hinting at his heritage but his English perfect. "I'm Javier, how can I help you?" Maria's gaze ran over him quickly, assessing and dismissing him all at once. "My car broke down across the street," she said sharply. "It's a Bentley Continental, I need it fixed immediately." "I have an important meeting in less than an hour." Javier nodded without offense, walked to the shop entrance and looked at the Bentley with calm interest, his eyes taking in details she couldn't possibly understand. "That's a beautiful car," he murmured. "Let's see what's wrong with it." But Maria didn't want compliments or conversation. She only wanted obedience. "I don't know what the problem is," she said coldly. "That's your job to figure out, can you fix it or not?" "I'll take a look," Javier said evenly, and the way he moved was deliberate, neither slow nor hurried, confident in the rhythm of his work. An older man came out from the office nearby, silver-haired, with gentle eyes that carried years of labor and quiet pride. "Need help, son?" he asked kindly. "I'm fine, Papa," Javier replied with a faint smile, and Maria felt a flicker of surprise. Papa. So this was a family-run place. She thought with disdain how quaint and small. She waited as Javier lifted the Bentley's hood and began to work. his hands moving with precision, his expression focused, every movement steady and assured. He listened to the engine, touched a few pipes, and after a while he straightened up, wiping his hands again. "Your cooling system has failed," he explained simply. "The radiator is cracked and the engine overheated. It damaged several seals and hoses." "It's serious," Maria's eyes widened in annoyance. "How long to fix it?" she demanded. "This kind of repair takes time," Javier replied. "I need to order specific parts. Maybe 3 days, possibly 4. And Maria's tone exploded into disbelief. 3 days? That's absurd. You expect me to believe this little shop can't handle it faster? I have meetings, I have clients, this is unacceptable." Javier looked at her quietly, unbothered, his calmness only infuriating her more. "Mrs.?" he asked gently. "Delgado," she snapped. "Maria Delgado, and I don't have time for this nonsense." "Mrs. Delgado," Javier said patiently. "I understand, but Bentley parts aren't stocked in small shops. And this job requires careful work. Rushing it could cause more damage." But Maria's world had no room for patience or understanding. "I don't care about your excuses," she cut him off. "Just do something temporary. Anything that gets it running." Javier's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained soft. "I can try, but it's risky," and Maria crossed her arms. "Do it," she ordered, "and make it quick." While he worked, Maria paced outside, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in loud tones about contracts and clients, ensuring every passerby knew who she was, her words dripping with superiority. The older man, Javier's father, approached with a kind smile, holding out a bottle of cold water and a folding chair. "Please sit, señora," he said. "It's too hot to stand," but Maria didn't even glance at the chair. "I'll stand, thank you," she replied curtly, and he nodded silently, returning inside half an hour later. Javier stood up and wiped his hands. "I've done what I can," he said. "The car will run, but please, take it to a proper Bentley service soon if you keep driving it like this. The engine could be destroyed." Maria didn't care about his warning. She cared about being late. "Finally," she said. Reaching into her designer bag, she pulled out her wallet and took a $100 bill. Tossing it carelessly toward him, it fluttered to the oil-stained ground, landing near his feet. $80, you said? Keep the change, she added with a condescending smile. Buy yourself something nice. Javier bent down silently, picked up the damp bill and looked at her. His expression unreadable, but Maria wasn't done. She couldn't stop herself. "If you want to get anywhere in life," she said, her voice sharp and cold, "you need to learn to work faster. Time is money, and you wasted a lot of mine today." She looked around the shop with disdain. "This place, your equipment, your surroundings, it's all small, poor, and ordinary. Maybe if you worked harder, you could find something better than this." Roberto, standing by the door, looked down in shame. But Javier's face stayed still, though something flickered in his eyes. Something that looked like patience stretched to its limit. Maria opened the car door, then turned back, driven by some cruel instinct to have the last word. "Let me give you advice," she said coldly. "People like you exist to serve people like me. That's how the world works. Do your job and shut up. That's all you need to do for a moment." Silence filled the street, heavy and scorching. Javier didn't move, didn't respond, only looked at her with eyes that saw something deeper than her arrogance. "Yes, Mrs. Delgado," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. "I understand perfectly." And as she sat back into her Bentley, she didn't look back. Didn't see the way Roberto put a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. Didn't see how Javier stood there quietly, holding the oil-stained bill like a memory he would never forget. Maria left in a rush of heat and dust, feeling victorious, feeling in control, feeling that she had once again put the world back in its proper place. She didn't realize she had just set in motion the single most important lesson of her life, a lesson that would break her pride and rebuild her soul. That day, in the scorching heart of Phoenix, Maria Delgado, queen of real estate, had humiliated the wrong man, a man who, though covered in grease and sweat, held more power, wisdom, and heart than all the money she had ever counted. And though she didn't know it yet, she had just looked into the eyes of the man who would one day change everything she believed about success, class, and what it truly means to be rich. The night of realization 3. Long weeks passed since that scorching morning when Maria Delgado had stepped into the poor neighborhood of Sunnydale and spat out her arrogance upon the quiet mechanic who had done nothing but help her. 3 weeks since she had thrown money into oil and humiliation, Without realizing, she had tossed her humanity along with it. In those weeks, her life had returned to its usual rhythm of luxury and command, filled with meetings, sales, and endless figures flashing across glowing screens. The kind of life that left no room for reflection, no time for humility, and no silence in which guilt could speak. Her empire continued to grow. Her reputation remained spotless, and to everyone who saw her, Maria Delgado was a woman carved from confidence and success, a queen walking on the thrones of her own making. But beneath that polished surface, small cracks had begun to appear. Cracks that Maria did not recognize yet. The temporary repair Javier had made on her Bentley began to fail exactly as he had warned. First came the faint whining sound when she accelerated, then the rise in temperature, and finally, one Thursday afternoon as she was heading to a client meeting, the engine choked, sputtered, and died right in the middle of the highway. She felt a rush of rage and humiliation as other drivers honked and swerved around her expensive car, sitting powerless like an abandoned relic. The dealership towed it away, and after inspection, the service manager with an apologetic tone informed her that the car had suffered severe engine damage. The cost of repair would be $45,000, and the car would be out of service for 6 weeks. Maria had listened, furious and incredulous. Unwilling to accept her own fault, she blamed Carlos for not noticing earlier. She blamed the dealership for poor craftsmanship. She blamed even the traffic for existing that day. But not once did she remember that kind, calm voice that had warned her exactly what would happen if she ignored the problem. She rented a sleek silver Mercedes to maintain her image and went about her work as if nothing had happened. But deep within her, something had begun to shift. A seed of restlessness had been planted, one that would soon grow into a storm she could not control. Her empire stood strong, yet her spirit began to weaken. Her nights became longer and emptier. She attended lavish dinners with business elites where champagne sparkled and laughter echoed, but every sound felt hollow, every face looked painted, and every compliment felt rehearsed. She watched her own reflection in the tall mirrors of expensive restaurants, and sometimes did not recognize the woman staring back. The woman whose smile never reached her eyes, whose laughter was mechanical, whose wealth had become a wall, not a window. One Friday night, Maria attended a grand business gala at Skyline, the most exclusive restaurant perched above the glittering city lights of Phoenix. The view was breathtaking, a sea of golden lights stretching across the desert, and Maria, dressed in a crimson Valentino gown that shimmered like fire, sat at the center of admiration, her name whispered with awe by investors, politicians, and other real estate titans. To everyone there, she was perfection. To herself, she was untouchable. But fate has its way of slipping through even the smallest cracks of arrogance, and that night it came quietly as she stepped outside after dinner, giving last-minute instructions to her assistant and preparing to enter her rented Mercedes. Her eyes caught something across the street that froze her completely, a flash of bright orange under the glow of streetlights. A Lamborghini Aventador SVJ, a machine so rare and powerful that it seemed almost alive. Its curves reflected the world like liquid gold. Maria knew cars. She lived in a world of wealth where machines were symbols of status, and she knew that this model cost over $600,000, the kind of car owned only by the elite few whose names were whispered in boardrooms. But it wasn't the car that sent a chill down her spine. It was the man walking toward it, keys in hand, a man she had thought belonged to another world entirely. Javier Santos. Her breath caught as she watched him approach the Lamborghini with the same quiet confidence she had seen in that small, greasy shop weeks ago. Only now his work uniform was replaced with dark jeans and a crisp white shirt that fit perfectly against his athletic frame. Beside him walked a woman with long chestnut hair who laughed softly at something he said, her dress elegant but simple, her hand brushing his arm affectionately. Javier opened the passenger door for her, a small act of courtesy that came naturally, then walked to the driver's side. His movements calm, assured, graceful, as if he belonged to the luxury that surrounded him. Not as an admirer, but as its equal, Maria stood rooted in place, her hand still on the car door, her heart thudding like a drum, her mind struggling to compute what she was seeing. The man she had insulted, dismissed, humiliated, the man she had told to do your job and shut up, was getting into a Lamborghini. Her disbelief turned to confusion and then to an odd, gnawing fear that she couldn't name. She told her driver in a sharp voice, "Follow that car." And though he hesitated, he obeyed. They trailed the glowing taillights of the Lamborghini through the winding streets of Phoenix. The silver Mercedes blending in among the night traffic. They drove through the upper parts of the city, past skyscrapers and neon lights, and then further north into Paradise Valley, where homes were not houses but palaces behind iron gates where silence cost more than gold. And finally, the Lamborghini turned into the driveway of a sprawling modern mansion that gleamed under soft exterior lights, glass walls reflecting the starlit sky. The house itself looked like a dream sculpted from marble and light. Maria's eyes widened as she saw the other vehicles parked inside the open garage. A black Porsche 911, a vintage Ferrari, and the orange Lamborghini completing the trio like jewels in a crown. Javier stepped out, closing the door gently, then turned to the woman with a tender smile, the kind that carried warmth instead of arrogance. Together they walked into the mansion, their silhouettes framed by the doorway. The garage door slid shut, and the house lights came alive with golden warmth. Maria watched from the shadow of her car, her throat dry, her mind spinning in disbelief. How could a mechanic from a small rundown shop live in a place like that, own cars like that, be surrounded by such quiet power and grace? She had seen too many pretenders in her life to know that this was not borrowed wealth. This was the kind of success that came from something deeper, something real. That night she didn't sleep. She couldn't. She sat in her penthouse with city lights bleeding through her floor-to-ceiling windows, her mind restless, her pride cracking open under the weight of curiosity and something dangerously close to shame. She searched his name online, typing Javier Santos Phoenix Mechanic into the glowing screen, expecting nothing, but what she found made her heart race and her stomach twist. There were articles, real ones, not gossip, published in respected business and engineering journals, and the name Javier Roberto Santos appeared again and again, not as a mechanic but as an innovator, a mechanical engineer from the University of Bologna in Italy, a graduate with distinction, former senior engine designer for Ferrari's research division, holder of multiple patents for engine efficiency and thermal control. Maria stared at the screen as words blurred before her eyes, her heart pounding as realization began to dawn like a cruel sunrise. This man, the one she had insulted and degraded, was not some poor worker trapped in a forgotten shop. He was a genius, an engineer whose innovations were used in supercars across the world. And yet he had chosen to live quietly, to work beside his father in a humble shop in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Phoenix. She read further, each sentence cutting deeper. 5 years ago, Javier had returned to the United States after his father's heart attack, leaving behind a flourishing career at Ferrari. He could have stayed in Italy surrounded by luxury and fame, but instead he had chosen family over fortune. He had chosen to return to that small shop to save his father's legacy and his health. And even more, he had built something extraordinary there. A training program called Repair and Rise that took young men and women from underprivileged neighborhoods, taught them not only auto repair but also financial literacy, self-discipline, and pride in their work. The article described how Javier spent his evenings mentoring students who had once been lost to the streets, how his graduates now ran their own small garages or worked in high-end dealerships, how he funded it all quietly without any sponsors, and how he believed that a broken life, like a broken engine, only needs someone willing to rebuild it carefully. Maria sat frozen, her perfectly manicured hands trembling slightly as she scrolled through more pages, photos of Javier surrounded by smiling students, interviews with young men saying he had changed their lives. One quote stood out like fire against her guilt. "Mr. Santos treated me like I mattered. He never made me feel small even when I knew nothing. He told me that every person deserves to be seen, not judged." Maria read those words again and again until her eyes blurred with tears she didn't want to acknowledge. It was almost dawn when she finally stood and walked to the tall mirror across her room. The woman staring back at her was still dressed in perfection. The silk robe, the diamonds, the polished skin, yet behind that beauty she saw something else. A hollowness, a stranger. She realized she had spent her life building walls of success so high that she could no longer see anyone else. She had spent her life measuring worth by income, by titles, by cars, and in doing so, she had stripped herself of something priceless, and respect, compassion, humanity, the very things that man from the oil-stained shop had carried so quietly. The sound of her own voice echoed in her head. That poisonous sentence she had thrown at him like a whip. "Do your job and shut up," and now it rang in her ears not as victory but as shame. She sat down slowly, feeling a heaviness in her chest. For the first time in years, she called her office and said the words her assistant had never heard from her before. I'm not coming in today. Her voice cracked as she spoke. She hung up and sat in silence, sunlight spilling into her penthouse, washing over her as if the universe itself was asking her to see what she had become. She remembered her childhood, the tiny apartment where her parents had lived, the long hours her mother spent at the laundry pressing other people's clothes, the tired face of her father returning home from cleaning office buildings late at night, and how she had promised herself she would escape poverty forever. She had done that, yes, but she had also escaped her own empathy. Somewhere along the way, in her pursuit of success, she had killed the part of herself that once understood the value of kindness. Now she sat alone among her trophies of success and felt small for the first time, smaller than the poorest person she had ever judged, because money could not buy back the moment she had looked into the eyes of a man better than her, and failed to see it. That night in Phoenix marked the beginning of Maria Delgado's transformation. Not through loss or punishment, but through realization. The realization that true wealth was not measured by what one owns, but by what one gives, and that sometimes the poorest man in the room carries the richest soul. The reckoning the morning after her sleepless night. Maria Delgado sat before the wide glass wall of her penthouse, the sunlight streaming across marble floors that looked cold and lifeless beneath her bare feet. She had always thought of sunlight as a symbol of victory, a sign that another day had come for her to conquer the world. But now it felt like an interrogation light, revealing everything she had spent years hiding from herself. Her empire was intact. Her phone still buzzed with messages from brokers, investors, and clients who wanted her attention, but for the first time she did not answer. Her mind was somewhere else entirely, replaying that moment at the small repair shop over and over again, hearing her own voice echo like poison through the heat of that day. "Do your job and shut up." The words now burned her from inside. They had been nothing to her when she said them, just another expression of the superiority she wore like armor. But now every syllable felt like a scar carved into her soul. Hours passed before she finally gathered the courage to act. She looked up the address of Santos Auto Repair on her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed. She could easily have called, but she knew that some things required presence. Apology was one of them. And so, leaving behind her tower of glass and pride, Maria drove herself to Sunnydale. No chauffeur, no luxury, just her and her thoughts. The streets that had once disgusted her now felt humbling. The laughter of children playing near broken fences, the sound of a radio drifting from an open window, the sight of people who lived simply but smiled honestly. It all felt different to her eyes now, as though the world had been repainted overnight. When she parked near the same small garage, her chest tightened. The faded sign, Santos Auto Repair, still hung above the open door, paint peeling a little more than before. Inside she saw Javier bent over an engine, his sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly messy, his hands moving with that same calm precision. He hadn't changed at all. He looked grounded, peaceful, like a man who didn't need validation from anyone, and that calmness made Maria's knees weak with shame. She stood by the doorway for a few moments, unable to find her voice, until Javier noticed her reflection in a side mirror and looked up. For a heartbeat he simply stared, recognition flickering in his eyes. But instead of anger or arrogance, there was only polite curiosity. "Mrs. Delgado," he said evenly, wiping his hands with a rag. "What brings you here?" His voice was calm, measured, neither cold nor welcoming, simply neutral, the kind of tone used by someone who had long ago made peace with being judged unfairly. Maria's lips parted, but no sound came out. She swallowed hard and finally managed to speak. I came to apologize." The words came out softer than she expected. Fragile, almost foreign to her tongue. Javier tilted his head slightly, waiting, and the silence around them grew thick, filled only by the ticking of cooling metal. "I said terrible things to you," she continued, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "Things that were cruel and wrong. I had no right. You helped me when you didn't have to, and I treated you like you were beneath me." She drew a shaky breath. "I'm sorry, truly sorry." Javier studied her face quietly for a long time. His eyes deepened, unreadable. Then he said, "Apology accepted," just like that, simple, calm, no dramatics. But something in the gentleness of his tone made Maria's throat tighten even more. She hadn't expected forgiveness to sound so effortless, so real. "I saw your house," she blurted out suddenly, embarrassed by her own impulsiveness. "The mansion, the cars, the program you run." Javier smiled faintly, almost shyly. "You did your research then," he said, wiping a smear of oil from his wrist. "It's nothing special. Just my father's old dream continuing in a new way." Maria shook her head. No, it's extraordinary, everything about it. The lives you've changed, the things you've built. And yet you live here, you work here? When you could be anywhere in the world, Javier looked around the modest shop, his gaze warm. Because this is home, Mrs. Delgado. And because not everyone needs the world to see their worth to know they have it. The simplicity of his words hit her harder than any insult ever could. They stripped away her excuses, her masks, leaving her naked in the truth of her own emptiness. I spent my whole life trying to be seen, she admitted quietly. Trying to prove I wasn't that poor girl who grew up counting coins at the corner store. Her eyes glistened as she spoke, and in the process I became someone I don't even recognize. I measured everything, people, love, respect, and by money, and it made me rich in the wrong ways. Javier listened without interruption, his expression compassionate but steady, and when she finished he nodded slowly. Sometimes success blinds us, he said. We think we're climbing higher. But we're really just building walls, Maria laughed bitterly. And you? You built bridges instead, Javier smiled gently. Maybe, but only because I once built walls too, he said, his gaze drifting to a framed photograph on the wall, a younger version of himself beside his father in the same garage, smiling with greasy hands and tired faces. When my mother died, I buried myself in work. I wanted to be the best, to prove that pain couldn't touch me. I chased perfection until my father's heart failed. And then I realized all the success in the world means nothing if you have no one left to share it with. His words hung heavy in the air, wrapping around Maria like warmth and sorrow mixed together. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. Would you let me help with your program, Javier? Repair and Rise, she said. I want to do something meaningful. Not for publicity, not for business, but because I think I finally understand what real value means. Javier looked at her carefully, studying the sincerity in her face. Help comes in many forms, he said. But before you offer it, you must forgive yourself first. Otherwise, every good act becomes an apology instead of a gift. Maria lowered her gaze, tears stinging her eyes. Then teach me how, she whispered. Teach me how to be better. That afternoon, instead of returning to her office tower, Maria stayed at the small garage. She watched Javier work. She spoke with his father, Roberto, who greeted her kindly as if the past humiliation had never happened. He offered her coffee in a paper cup and told her stories about the neighborhood, about the kids who came through their program and turned their lives around. Maria listened, really listened, for perhaps the first time in years. She saw the pride in Roberto's wrinkled eyes when he spoke of his son, and the humility with which Javier responded to every compliment. And she realized that love was not loud. It was quiet and consistent, like the steady hum of an engine that never failed. Over the following weeks, Maria began to visit regularly. At first, she stayed on the sidelines, helping organize donations, cleaning the office, arranging parts deliveries. But soon she was speaking to the young trainees, sharing her experiences, teaching them basic business principles, how to manage money, how to negotiate fairly. They listened not because she was rich, but because she was honest. She told them about her mistakes, about the emptiness that came with chasing only success, about the night she couldn't recognize herself anymore. And in their curious faces she found something she had lost long ago: purpose. Javier watched this transformation quietly. He never praised her publicly, never drew attention to it, but sometimes when their eyes met, there was a silent acknowledgement, a kind of respect that neither words nor wealth could buy. In those moments, Maria understood that redemption was not about erasing the past. It was about building something good enough to make peace with it. Months passed and Repair and Rise grew faster than ever. New sponsors approached. Media outlets wanted to feature the story, but Javier refused interviews, insisting that their focus should remain on the students. Maria followed his lead. She didn't want the spotlight anymore. She wanted substance. She found herself spending weekends at the garage, laughing with the trainees, sharing meals with the Santos family, and discovering that happiness didn't come from marble floors or designer gowns, but from sincerity, from community, from seeing another person rise because of your effort. One evening as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in deep amber, Maria stood beside Javier outside the shop. The air smelled of gasoline and desert wind. You changed my life, she said softly. And Javier shook his head. No, Mrs. Delgado, you changed your own. I only reminded you what was always inside, she smiled. The first real smile in years, one that reached her eyes and stayed there. The wind tugged at her hair, And for a moment she thought about the woman she used to be. Proud, distant, untouchable, and she felt a surge of gratitude that life had broken her in just the right place for the light to come in. That night, when she returned to her penthouse, it no longer felt like a trophy. It felt like an empty shell, and for the first time she didn't feel the need to fill it with noise or glitter. She looked out over the city and whispered quietly, "Thank you." Not to the stars, not to herself, but to the quiet mechanic who had taught her that worth is never measured by wealth, and that every human being, no matter how small their role seems, deserves to be seen with respect. The fire that tested gold months had passed since Maria Delgado had first walked back into the little shop on Sunnydale Street, and in that time her world had shifted so profoundly that even she could barely recognize the woman she used to be. The one who once barked orders from behind tinted glass now arrived early on Saturday mornings in jeans and a plain white shirt, her hair tied back, her hands sometimes stained with oil from helping sort through boxes of donated parts. She no longer cared about who saw her or what they whispered, because she had discovered something far more precious than prestige. Peace. The quiet kind that comes from doing something meaningful, from knowing that every hour spent helping another life rebuild was a brick in the bridge back to her own humanity. The program Repair and Rise had grown beyond expectation. Young men and women who once feared they had no future now walked through those worn garage doors with heads held higher. They learned not only about engines but about dignity, responsibility, and confidence. Maria had helped to design a small classroom beside the workshop, donating computers and desks, arranging for local business mentors to come and speak. And yet, despite all the good she did, she never once put her name on a plaque or a sign. She didn't want her generosity to shine brighter than the purpose itself. Javier noticed this quiet humility and respected it deeply. Their friendship had become one of mutual admiration, neither romantic nor distant, but grounded in a shared understanding that true success isn't measured by what you own. It's measured by what you give away without expecting applause. It was on one of those golden afternoons, when the air shimmered with heat and the scent of grease and desert dust hung heavy, that everything changed again. Javier was inside finishing up a rebuild on an old Mustang with two of his students, laughter echoing through the workshop. Maria was in the office with Roberto, going through donation receipts when they smelled it, smoke, faint at first, then thick and acrid, rolling through the open back door like a dark wave. "The storage shed," one of the boys shouted, and in an instant the calm of the day turned into chaos. The shed behind the shop where spare tires, fuel cans, and equipment were kept had caught fire. No one knew how it started. Perhaps a spark from a welder, perhaps the heat itself. But within seconds, orange flames were leaping high into the dry air. Javier ran toward the blaze without hesitation, shouting for the boys to grab the extinguishers. Roberto tried to help, but the smoke made him cough violently. Maria rushed to his side. Guiding him back toward safety, the fire spread fast, licking across oil-stained ground. Catching onto crates stacked near the wall, someone called 911, but the fire trucks were still minutes away. And in those minutes, everything that Javier and his father had built, every tool, every memory, every piece of history, hung in fragile balance. Maria could see Javier silhouetted against the flames, his shirt dark with sweat, his movements precise even in panic, directing his students with calm authority, and in that moment she understood something she had never seen before. The measure of a person's strength is not in how they command others, but in how they protect them when everything burns. Without thinking, Maria grabbed a heavy tarp and ran forward, ignoring Javier's shout for her to stay back. She helped one of the trainees drag a gas can away from the fire's reach, her lungs filled with smoke, her throat burned, but she kept going, coughing, sweating, determined. She no longer cared that her hair was singed or her expensive shoes were ruined. She only knew she couldn't stand by while the place that had given her life meaning turned to ash. Finally, the sound of sirens grew louder and the firemen arrived, hoses blasting arcs of white foam and water across the inferno until the flames hissed and fell, leaving behind charred debris and gray smoke that hung like a ghost over the yard. When it was finally over, Maria stood beside Javier in silence, both covered in soot, both breathing hard. The shed was gone. The back wall blackened, but the main workshop had survived. "We lost the storage," Javier said quietly, his voice rough. "But the heart of it is still here." He looked at her, his expression full of gratitude. "You shouldn't have run in there," he said. "You could have been hurt." Maria smiled faintly, her face streaked with ash. "So could you. But you didn't think twice either," she replied, and he nodded. "Because this place matters. "It matters to me too," she said softly. And for the first time, those words meant something real. The fire department left after confirming it was safe. Neighbors gathered offering food, water, and help. Word spread quickly through Sunnydale. And the next morning, something miraculous happened. People began arriving. Trainees, their families, former students, even strangers from the neighborhood, all carrying tools. Wood, buckets of paint, whatever they could spare. By noon, more than 50 people were working side by side, rebuilding the shed, cleaning the mess, restoring what the fire had taken. Maria walked among them, handing out cold drinks, bandaging small burns, feeling tears blur her vision as she realized that kindness, once planted, multiplies faster than any spark can destroy. Javier's program had not just repaired cars. It had repaired hearts. It had created a community, and she was now part of it. That evening, when the last board was nailed and the sun dipped low, the new shed stood proudly, smaller for now but strong, built not by contractors but by love. The group shared a meal cooked by one of the mothers, laughter filling the cooling air, and Maria sat beside Roberto, who smiled warmly at her. "When we first met," he said in his gentle voice, "I offered you water and you refused it. Today you risked your life to save ours." Maria's eyes filled as she whispered, "I didn't deserve forgiveness, but you gave it anyway." The old man patted her hand. "Forgiveness is not something we give to others, my dear. It's something we give to free ourselves." And she understood completely later that night, when the garage was quiet and the stars hung like diamonds above the desert sky. Javier found Maria still sitting outside, her hands folded, her expression distant. "You rebuilt today what you once helped burn," he said softly, sitting beside her. "That's rare. Most people just apologize and move on." She looked at him, her voice low. "You showed me what real strength looks like. Not the kind that buys power, but the kind that gives it away freely. I used to think I was rich, but today, working beside everyone, sweating and laughing and building together, I felt wealth in a way I never have before." Javier smiled at her words. "Then you've truly risen," he said, "because rising doesn't mean standing above others. It means reaching back and lifting them with you." They sat in silence for a long time, the smell of burnt wood lingering faintly in the air, but instead of sadness it carried a strange sweetness, like a reminder that even from ashes, something beautiful could be born. Maria looked at the dark outline of the shop and felt her chest swell with gratitude. She had spent years chasing perfection, never realizing that perfection isn't gold without fire, that the soul, like metal, needs heat to shine, and that the fire she had once feared, humiliation, failure, vulnerability, was the very thing that had purified her heart. As midnight approached and the city lights shimmered far away, Maria finally rose, dusted her jeans, and turned toward Javier. "Tomorrow I'll call some people I know," she said with quiet determination. "We'll raise enough funds to expand this place, to protect it properly. Fire alarms, insurance, the works." Javier opened his mouth to protest, but she lifted a hand. "Not as charity," she said, "as partnership. I owe this place not my money, but my purpose. And I intend to protect it." Javier nodded, understanding her tone, and in that shared moment of resolve, the last remnants of pride between them dissolved completely. When Maria drove home later, she didn't see her penthouse as a symbol of victory anymore. She saw it as a resource, a means to do good. She stood at her window that night watching the city sleep and whispered a promise to herself, that the woman who once dismissed kindness as weakness would now build her legacy on compassion, that she would never again let arrogance silence gratitude, and that she would make sure the fire that had tested her would be remembered not as destruction, but as rebirth. That night the moon hung over Phoenix like a witness, and if the stars could speak, they would have said that Maria Delgado, the woman who once ordered others to do their job and shut up, had finally learned that the greatest job any soul can do is to serve with heart open, and the truest silence is the peace that follows redemption, the harvest of light. The dawn that rose over Phoenix that following spring was unlike any that Maria Delgado had ever witnessed. For the first time in decades, she woke not to the vibration of her phone or the clang of deadlines, but to the hum of quiet fulfillment that pulsed somewhere deep inside her. The city glittered below her balcony as it always had, but now she saw it differently, no longer a battlefield of deals and acquisitions, but a living mosaic of souls, each one struggling, dreaming, surviving. She brewed her own coffee that morning, not caring that her manicured hands smelled faintly of oil from yesterday's work at the shop. To her, that scent had become the perfume of purpose, a reminder that the life she now lived was one she had earned not through dominance but through humility. In the months that followed the fire, repair and rise had flourished beyond imagination. The local news picked up the story of the small garage that refused to die. Donations poured in, not from corporations seeking publicity, but from ordinary people who believed in the cause. With Maria's organizational brilliance and Javier's vision, the old shop expanded into a full training center, complete with classrooms, simulation labs, and a scholarship program for those who wanted to pursue engineering. Every wall of the new building carried the fingerprints of people who had once thought they had none. Every bolt and beam held laughter, effort, and gratitude. Maria moved through it all like a different woman, guiding with kindness instead of command, mentoring with patience instead of pride. She had finally discovered that leadership was not about being obeyed, but about being trusted. One late afternoon, as the desert sun melted into gold over the skyline, the new Santos Community Learning Center opened its doors. People filled the courtyard, and students, parents, neighbors, volunteers, and the air buzzed with warmth. Javier stood on the small stage with his father beside him, their faces glowing in the soft light. When he invited Maria to speak, she hesitated for a moment, her throat tightening with emotion. The crowd grew quiet as she stepped forward, dressed simply in a white blouse and jeans, no designer label, no jewelry beyond a silver bracelet given to her by one of the students. She looked out over the faces before her and saw not strangers but mirrors of her own journey. A long time ago, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I believed that success was about climbing higher than everyone else. I believed that if you stood tall enough, you could never fall. But I was wrong. The higher you climb without compassion, the lonelier the air becomes. She paused, letting the words settle. I once insulted a man whose hands were covered in grease but whose soul was made of gold. I told him to do his job and shut up, not knowing that he was already doing the greatest job a person can do, building others. A murmur rippled through the audience, some recognizing the story from whispers that had traveled through the community. Maria continued, her eyes on Javier. That day changed my life. I learned that humility is not weakness, it is wisdom, that money can buy almost anything except peace, and that forgiveness is the only currency that never loses value. She smiled faintly. Today I stand here not as a millionaire, but as a student, learning every day from people who remind me what humanity truly means. Her words drew quiet tears from more than a few listeners. Even Javier's usually calm eyes shimmered when she finished. The applause that followed was not the kind of applause given to power, but the kind offered to truth after the ceremony. As dusk deepened into velvet blue and lanterns flickered to life, Maria found herself standing alone near the edge of the courtyard. Watching the students laugh and pose for photos, Javier approached her silently, handing her a small piece of metal, a gear from the old Bentley engine that had first brought them together, polished now and mounted on a wooden base. I kept it, he said, his voice soft, as a reminder that even broken things can start something powerful. Maria took it in her hands, the metal cool and smooth, and for a long moment she couldn't speak. Thank you, she whispered finally, for fixing more than a car. Javier smiled. You fixed yourself. I only handed you the wrench. The two of them stood together under the soft glow of the lights, the laughter of the crowd behind them blending with the low hum of evening crickets. Somewhere in the distance a car engine roared, a sound that once symbolized wealth but now felt like freedom. Roberto joined them, his kind eyes twinkling. You know, he said with a chuckle, my wife used to say every person is like an engine. Sometimes they overheat, sometimes they stall, but as long as the heart still turns, there's hope. Maria laughed through the tears that welled up. Then I suppose mine just needed a new mechanic, she said, and the three of them laughed together, the sound mingling with the desert wind. Months later, Repair and Rise opened its second branch in Tucson. Run entirely by former students, Maria invested in the expansion quietly, insisting that her name remain absent from the headlines. She no longer needed recognition. The satisfaction came each time she watched a graduate receive their certificate and shake Javier's hand with pride. It came in small things, in a thank you note from a young single mother who had learned to repair cars to feed her children, in the smile of an old neighbor whose son had found purpose instead of prison, in the way the community now looked at her not with envy but with respect. At night, when she returned home, she would walk through her once lonely penthouse and feel no emptiness, because her heart was already full. The silence that used to suffocate her now felt peaceful, Filled with unseen echoes of laughter and redemption, she kept that small Bentley gear on her desk, and whenever she felt doubt creeping back, she would touch it and remember the day she mistook humility for weakness, and how wrong she had been years later. When people spoke of Maria Delgado, they did not mention the mansion she sold or the empire she built. They spoke of the woman who turned a moment of arrogance into a lifetime of service, of the millionaire who became a mentor, of the day she stood beside a mechanic and helped rebuild not just a garage, but a community. And though she never sought it, her story became legend in its own quiet way, told in classrooms and whispered in workshops, reminding everyone who heard it that greatness is not in how high you rise, but in how deeply you touch the ground beneath you. And somewhere, in a humble shop bathed in sunlight and filled with the scent of oil and coffee, a plaque hung on the wall with simple engraved words that Javier had placed there the day she retired. Do your job, but never shut up when your heart calls you to do good. Maria Delgado read those words every time she visited, smiled, and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude, knowing that her journey from pride to purpose had come full circle. And as she stepped into the golden light of another Arizona evening, the world around her shimmered with quiet promise, the promise that even the hardest hearts can learn to love again if only they are willing to listen.